Take me inside your election night, this past election in November of 2024.
Well, but you got to go back. It's a 2-year cycle we work on. So every election, what happened in this cycle, 2022, how do we improve the process further? And I think two of the really big ones is we put into state law with SB 202 that results had to be reported, or lines had to be shorter than 1 hour. That was SB 202. And we kept those lines in 2022, 2024, average of about 2 minutes. And then when I went to vote, I was in and out, including the line time, in about 8 minutes. So people were having that kind of a voter experience. That builds trust, but also people have smiles on their face because they're done so quick. So that was important. Then this last bill that we had last year with SB 189 actually said that all that early voting that we had on the 17 days early voting and also the absentee voting had to get reported 1 hour after the polls closed. So by 8 o'clock, you saw 70 to 80% of all the vote totals for all the different counties. And that just gave people assurance. Oh, wow, look at all those numbers roll in. And then we're just looking at what happened on election day. And that was about 17, 18%. And that just kind of rolled in. But by 10 o'clock at night, we knew what the results were. 10:30, I called the governor and let him know what the results were because I wanted to make sure before I called the governor. And by 10:45, we told the press, and some of the national media didn't want to report it so soon. But no, this thing's over, and President Trump has carried the state of Georgia.
Some of the new rules that were in place that you're pointing to in November of 2024 were passed by the state legislature in the wake of the 2020 election. When you look back on that election, how does 2020 compare to the experience in 2024 for you?
I think really the only major difference from our perspective is in the middle of a pandemic, you had 25 to 30% of the people voted absentee in the fall election. But other than that, the process was really the same. We've never changed state law on that. We still have no excuse absentee voting. We still get you can choose if you want to vote absentee, you can vote early, or you vote on election day. But we now do have photo ID for the absentee ballot process that added security, but by doing that added confidence and trust in that process. So that's what really we put into place with SB 202 for the 2022 cycle and the 2024. But people have gone back to their patterns of how they want to vote. And in Georgia, people like to vote in person. And what we're seeing now, we had 77% of all voters wanted to vote in person early. We have 17 days of it. And it really helps the counties so that when you show up on election day, those lines will be short, they'll move fast, and then getting those results quick, I think, is another confidence builder. In fact, UGA did a poll, and we're just really excited that over 90%, almost 94% of all Georgians have high trust in our elections.
And that poll was conducted just in the few weeks, if I recall correctly, following the 2024 November election.
Exactly,
right?
And that's a UGA poll. That's not Brad's poll. That's the unbiased poll. And so we're just excited to see that. And 98% of all voters had a great voter experience. They just thought the poll workers were really well trained, very friendly. So they were in and out, and everyone's talking about voting in less than 10 minutes. And that's pretty good, including line time. You can't beat that.
And I know that you and your office are now pushing what I think you've called the Georgia Plan, which is a national election rule reform plan,
right.
Correct?
Exactly. The Georgia Plan really says we believe that we should have photo ID for all forms of voting. We've shown how it's done. The same identification we require for in-person voting, that's what we require for voting absentee. It works, it builds security, gives people confidence. Number two, we think voters should have choices. So absentee voting, early voting, election day. Let voters decide how they want to vote. And then making sure only American citizens are on the voter rolls, so making sure only American citizens are voting. That has strong, very strong bipartisan support of the average person that's walking on the street, Republican or Democrat. They both believe that only American citizens should be voting in our elections. Things like that. But then also making sure the lines are short. That's not so much about, really, is it an accurate election, but keeping the line short builds confidence. But also, why shouldn't voters have fun? And so we put that into law. And then the last one is report those results no later than start reporting those early results that you got from your early voting and your absentee no later than 1 hour after the polls close. We think all those come together, and you have a great voter experience, high confidence. 94% of all Georgians trust it. that leads the country in voter confidence, and we think that's really important because we understand that society probably is still polarized. But if you can build trust, I think that's healthy for America.
Some people, when they hear about proposals or laws enacted that require things like photo IDs to vote, some people argue that those are measures that might restrict access to polls for people who are and should be legitimately able to vote, and this is just a barrier preventing them from casting a legitimate ballot. To somebody who might raise that argument, what would you say to them?
Well, we actually made sure when we passed photo ID back in just right after, I guess, 2010, somewhere in that range, plus or minus 5 years before my time, we actually said you could have 8 other forms of identification. And if you don't have any of that, the state will provide a free ID for you. And it's never been proven to be a barrier. If you look at our turnout that we've had over the years, we had 4 million show up in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. Now we had 5 million show up 4 years later. Look at the gubernatorial cycle of 2018 and 2022. That also, so every cycle we're having stronger voter participation. It's because voters trust the process. It's easy to vote, but we make sure we have the right balance of security so people can trust the results.
I want to start looking ahead to this legislative session in a moment, but I want to spend one more second here as we talk about what came before, because in this office in particular, there is a real line of continuity from your predecessor, now Governor Brian Kemp, to your role in this office and through the 2020 election to our most recent election. In 2020, you faced real pressure from now President-elect Donald Trump and others to find evidence of what he described as widespread voter fraud here in Georgia, and evidence that you said repeatedly and your office said repeatedly did not exist. Mm-hmm. President-elect Trump will take the oath of office in a few days. When you watch him do that, what's going to be going through your mind?
Well, we made sure we had free, fair, and fast elections. Every election that I've been the supervisor of elections for the last 6 years. And so we really feel good where we are, and we've actually shown the model of what it should look like, because voters in Georgia, over 90% trust our system. I wish them well. In fact, that'll probably flip us into the next topic, because when you think about some of the people he's pulled in as advisor, like Elon Musk, he wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal about reducing barriers, because when you have these high barriers for business creation, it stifles innovation and job creation. We think that licensing reform fits right into that model, and that's what we've been talking to the General Assembly about. We had our committee that we started 2 years ago, and I pulled together both sides of the aisle, brought in the Georgia Chamber, the Savannah Chamber, Metro Atlanta Chamber. So we had a lot of heads at the table, looking about what that looks like. Then we got some of that last year. But then this last cycle, General Assembly said we're going to form a bipartisan commission, and also both chambers, Senate and the House. And they came out and they looked at it and they agree with us. In fact, Speaker Burns talked about licensing reform. It's going to be a big issue and something that they support this year in the House. We believe it has Senate support, and we think we can bring a good bill, good legislation to the governor, and he'll have a big smile on his face when they sign that, because they know it's the right thing for Georgians.
When we talk about licensing reform, I think it's one of those issues that folks who maybe are not deep in the weeds of how the business of government and how the business of the back end of starting a business works might not be so familiar with. So maybe let's zoom out for just a moment. What is licensing reform? Why, in your view, is it important?
Well, maybe we should start off, what is licensing? So first off,
this is this process, this engineering process here.
So our office, we license about 140 different occupations and professions. And we don't have all of them. So the realtors have their own board that they have for their licensing, things like that. And we have 40 different boards. But our office, has oversight over, things such as geologists, architects, electricians, plumbers, psychologists, hairdressers, and also barbers. So you look at it's a broad, there's 140 different occupations and professions. Nursing is our largest profession that we do, have responsibility for. What we want to do is build a process. One of the things that we've been telling folks is one of the problems that we have is the people that get on these boards that we're actually issuing the license. We don't have that authority. The board does that, and that's appointed by the governor. They're out there running their own business. They may not meet for every 3 or 4 months. Meanwhile, this license has been sitting here. Everything's good to go. We've done all the paperwork. They've done all the license applicant has done all their work. It's sitting there. We're saying if once it's been there for 20 or 30 days, we'd like to have the administrative authority. If they've done all that, we'll just go ahead and issue that. So the board then, when it does meet, can actually work on looking at the people that make violations of law. Well, they have to then do an investigation. We do the investigation for them, but they can focus in on that part. So that would be really important. Then I think some of the things we need to look at is, for example, hairdressers and barbers. How much has their profession really changed over the last 2 years? They have to renew every 2 years. They have to also do continuing education every 2 years. What's really changed? Maybe we can do that every 4 years. It lowers the cost for them, also reduces the burden of being able to do that. So I think we need to look at that with common sense reform. I think that'll be also good. And so I just look at things that we can do to really streamline it, reduce burdens. It's going to be good for Georgians. It's going to be good for Georgia.
You reference barbers, hairstylists, nurses as some of the key examples of folks who come through the licensing process that flows through your office here and then to those respective boards. For somebody who wants to become, let's say, a licensed hairstylist in Georgia, what do they have to do to right now get that license?
Well, first of all, most people that are getting a license, let's say you'd go to barber school or you go to a hairstylist school, cosmetology license typically. And so you have all different sorts of things that you do and you get technical training. You graduate from there, so you have a piece of paper, say, I got a diploma from this, organization. Now, if you're a structural engineer, civil engineer, or a general contractor, typically you're going to have a university degree, things like that. But you can get some technical degree. And then you have to then, go out and write an exam, and then you have to pass the exam for, say, if you're a plumber or electrician, so we know that you really do have the skill. Wasn't just had the technical. You get your license as an original license. Then in 2 years, you have to do continuing education, and you have to keep up with that, and then you have to apply, for renewal. And I know that as an engineer, I have to do 24 hours in that. As general contractors, about 24 hours also. And so there's a cost. And we want to make sure that we can keep that cost of that continuing education down to the minimum for more like an occupation like barbers and cosmetologists, things like that. I know that when you come out of Georgia Tech with an engineering degree, they're making really big money, which is a great thing. I didn't make that when I got out of school, but they can probably afford to spend a couple $100 here or $1,000 there. But we want to make sure those burdens are really reduced for people that have to do these things, and particularly when technology has not changed. In the tech space, such as engineering or nursing, it does change, and so there is a appropriate role, but we still need to be mindful of that for everyone. And I think having that administrative power to give people a license when they've done all their paperwork, got all their hours, I think that would really help them.
It seems like this effort, this legislative push that's coming from you, is still in its early days relative to the where we are in the session right now, if that's a fair characterization.
It's day 2. We just finished that up. So, yep, we still have 38 days to go. But we've been crafting legislation and working with both chambers.
Is it? And I ask this because I want to make sure my understanding and anybody who's watching, their understanding is clear here. Because it seems like when you talk about licensing reform, there are a lot of stakeholders here, a lot of different industries, a lot of different boards, a lot of moving parts, right? From a macro perspective, broadly speaking, when you're talking about licensing reform, you would argue that licensing reform is a good idea because what, in a macro sense?
It reduces burdens. It lets people work on their job and make money for themselves, not spending time doing paperwork. We want to make sure we don't stifle innovation. We want to make sure we don't put any roadblocks on anyone that wants to build a better future for themselves. I think, Elon Musk had a great article in Wall Street Journal, because that's what he was really getting to. Now he's talking more about what his world looks like. It's different, but we want to make sure that goes up and down the line. It's really important for hardworking Georgians to be able to, get back to work in their job. And also it becomes attractive to attract more talent to the state, the more that we can reduce burdens. So it just is really a friendly place to have an occupation, friendly place to have a career.
Do you anticipate it would be a one-size-fits-all solution, or would the proposed reform look different for each industry that is right now having to be licensed through your office?
There's about 2 to 3 points perhaps that touches everyone, but then there'll actually be specific ones. We touch so many different code sections. It's a big code book, a lot of different professions. What I told you, we had 140 licensed professions, and we could have some great philosophical debates. Do we really need to license this and license that? But as long as it is required by state law, we're going to make sure that we can get those license holders their license as quick as possible.
Licensing reform seems like a big push from your office right now. What else is top of mind for you as we head into this new legislative session?
Licensing reform. I think that's our number one focus. Obviously, we may look at a few little tweaks with election law, but really, when you have over 94% of all Georgians trust that, it doesn't need a lot of tweaking. But licensing reform is something we can really help Georgians, hardworking Georgians that are looking for a break from government. And we understand we work for the people, and we need to reduce barriers so that they can get out there and put food on the table for themselves and for their families.
Let's end here. You were reelected in 2022. Your term ends in 2026. What is next for you when you leave office?
Well, you never know. I'm sure we'll have plenty of options and lots of discussions. But right now, we're just focusing on this session. We think that's the best thing, because you start talking about the future too far out. I think that you can start getting off message and defocused. We think licensing reform is really a moral imperative, because it really gets down to when the rubber meets the road. We want to make sure we don't stifle innovation, we don't stifle job creation. That's really important for everyday Georgians. You've been in Georgia politics a long time, though. It sounds like you are leaving your future options open right now. Well, you never know where the future holds anything, but I just want to make sure that Georgia is a great place to build a business, great place to raise a family and build your career. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.